Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or good day, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the next episode of No Dice, No Glory. Sponsored by our jobs that actually pay us money, we're coming to you not at all live from an abandoned arms factory deep under a mountain in West Virginia. We are proud to proffer to you the finest in wargaming coverage. Without any further ado, let's get this show on the road.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is the No Dice, No Glory crew. I am Mitch Reed, and I am joined, as always, by Phil Bolger.
Hello.
And today we have a special guest. We have Data Lombardy, who is, should we say he's one of the greats in the industry, Phil?
I think it's a safe bet.
I think it's a safe bet. So, Dana, welcome. Good morning. How you doing today?
Thank you. You're embarrassing me. It's a good thing there's no video. Otherwise, you'd see me all red.
It's okay.
I appreciate being on here, guys. I always love talking about games, and I have loved doing them for since 1971. Wow.
Yeah. So before we get into the Great War card game, I have to get into some of the past. You've designed some very iconic games, but tell us about your past in war game design and development.
Well, as I said, I started in 1971 while I was still in college, and I started a game company called Simulations Design Corporation, SDC, in San Diego while I was still at San Diego State University. And we didn't know what we were doing, made every business mistake you can make, and that didn't last long. It was only 4 or 5 years, but we got out Conflict Magazine, which was like Strategy and Tactics Magazine, had basically a game in every issue. And some of the ones that I was able to work on with John Hill, who did Squad Leader, he did Jerusalem, which was 1948 war tactical, which was an amazing game because it included basically you keep moving. And most of the games where I move, I go, you go, roll the dice. And his game, Jerusalem, basically did not have any of that. You kept moving your pieces until they couldn't move anymore, or you decided not to move them. And that was quite a breakthrough back then. I also worked on his Hue, Battle for Hue game, which was street fighting in the city of Hue in Vietnam. And working with John, I learned so much. And I also, publishing the magazine, got to know Roger McGowan, who everybody I'm sure knows who he is now, but at the time he was a new, growing in popularity graphic artist and graphic designer. So I just want everyone to understand that, it'd be nice for me to say, well, I'm such a genius and I figured this all out. It's like, no way, it is impossible. I learned from some of the best people in the industry, and I figured out things, usually the hard way at first. And I then went from that company, SDC, which failed, unfortunately, and I worked for a publisher that put out a magazine called Model Retailer, which went out to hobby shops, the guys who had plastic model airplanes, model trains, radio-controlled cars and boats, and so forth. And I worked on that magazine, which went out to those stores. And my purpose was to educate people in the trade, in the business, about games and why they needed to put games in their stores. And this is pre-Dungeons and Dragons, by the way. So
wow.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, SPI was the big dog along with Avalon Hill. They had massive numbers of games out there in the hobby, but they were not in the stores. And it was my job to try and get the store owners to take them in, figure out, well, how do I sell these things? And all that was what I wrote a column every month about and did reviews and so forth. But it was not for consumers. Okay. So I sort of disappeared from the consumer side of things, but all the businesses and all the publishers and the guys who were doing that, I got to know. I was very fortunate to sit down with them at trade shows. And we put together, basically a successful program that got hobby shops to put games into their stores. And then eventually game-only stores were brought into the industry. And that, of course, led to GAMA, the Game Manufacturers Association. And so I've been able to be a witness, a participant in that history, which then led to my involvement getting back into publishing. And in 2010, I restarted publishing on my own. I have a little company called Lombardy Studios, but I partner with a lot of people like Roger McGowan and like others like Frank Chadwick and people that I've worked with in the past. And that's where I'm at. And that's the brief overview, guys.
That's awesome. You're also an award winner. We have to mention that. You won the Dunnigan Award. You were nominated in '02 in a bunch of categories, but you won Best War Game Tactics for Streets of Stalingrad, which is another classic game, probably one of the best Stalingrad games out there. The other one that I happen to love is Conflict of Heroes: Storms of Steel, that you worked with Academy Games on. Another really good game. And just based on what you just said just now, Bill and I may have a million questions for you because we love the design aspect of that.
I'm happy to answer.
Because I don't know about you, but like I want to get to this game first and foremost, but I got some serious like things you've seen in design over the few years, over your years in the hobby. I got a million questions on that. But I want to talk about a game that I backed on Kickstarter that I really want to see go over the finish line. We have 14 days left. Actually, when this comes out, it'll be 15 days as of today. This will be out today. And it's you teaming up with Roger McGowan, and it's a Great War card game.
Yes. Yeah, that was a basically an idea that I had back in 2017, and I had talked to Roger about several different projects. I've contributed to his C3I magazine, and he and I go way back, like I said. And I said, there is a lot of artwork that you, Roger, have done over the years that people may not know about. For example, in this card game you're talking about, a piece of art that Roger did, an illustration that was used on The Guns of August by Avalon Hill, that was published back in 1981, which means that, there's like, that's 2 generations of gamers who were born and grew up since that game came out and since people saw that box cover. So what I told Roger was, maybe we can repurpose this stuff. Maybe we can show some of the artwork that you've done over the years. And he loved the idea. And we came out with this card game, which really allows us to, spotlight his artwork on the cards. About 25% of the cards have his art, and the rest are basically colorized historical photographs or images.
So I was scrolling through Kickstarter. And in 1981, because I'm not as young as Phil, I remember buying the game Guns of August, and it was one of my favorite games, and probably the game I'm most upset that I no longer have in my collection. And that's what drew me to it right away. As you will find out, I am a Great War junkie when it comes to these things. So looking at the game and looking at other games you developed in the past, this is a totally different genre of game, and with totally different mechanics.
Oh yes, absolutely. This is what's so strange. Of course, here's where, when you make mistakes, you make big ones in my case. So in 2017, I told Roger, here's this idea. What do you think? He said, let's do it. And then I said to myself and the people working on it, play testing and everything, is like, okay, I've never done a card game. I've done games with cards, but I've never done a card game. And I thought, how hard can it be? Oh my God. What this is like, what the gods were listening and decided to punish me. I'll tell you, it wasn't that it was so impossible to do it compared to a board game or something that I've done in the past. The problem is that I was able to keep the rules down to 1 sheet of paper, 2 sides. That's it, because all of the little nuances and things that work together or against each other in the cards, that's on the cards. Those rules, those specific things are on the cards, whether they're icons that tell you whether you can add it to another card or cancel another card, or whether it's an aviation card, naval card, and so forth. That's all there. And then it says, do this, or you can do that. And so you simply do what's on the card. So I love the fact that it was able to be such a simple game in terms of understanding and not having to read a 48-page rule book. But the problem is the number of variations, the number of ways that they could work for and against each other were so great that it became a giant, spreadsheet. It became this huge God, it was like, oh my God, this playtesting is never going to end, because every time we thought we stopped something, it's like the whack-a-mole. You know how you have the whack-a-mole game where you sit there and you hit a mole when it pokes its head out, and then you hit another one when it pokes its head out. That was playtest. It's like playtesting this game. It was like every time we thought, oh my God, that won't work because it works here, but not here. Anyway, the bottom line is that it took from 2017 to last year at Consum World Expo that we finally worked out the last of the bugs, at least I hope so, on how the cards work, and we were able to keep it simple, because that was something that was important to me and Roger, because of one important thing. We remember those old games also, those Avalon Hill games, Africa Corps, Battle of the Bulge, Waterloo. Those only had a couple of pages of rules. And so we all got into this hobby very easily. The games were not as sophisticated and didn't have as much chrome and everything else as they do now, but it was a great way to get into the hobby. And so I said to myself, and Roger, I want to do something that's not another Streets of Stalingrad. Not that I'm ashamed of it, not that I don't love it. It's just that that's for the hardcore grognard who's already convinced, already willing to spend the time on it. But you can't give Streets of Stalingrad to somebody who doesn't even play war games and say, here, figure this out. Nope. It doesn't work. So I did this game because it's a filler game on, at Consum World, how they have the monster games. They have guys laid out tables, right? So there they are. And it's like, okay, it's your turn, your side. And now I have to sit here for about an hour or something and I have nothing to do. Well, it's a filler game. You could literally play this game very quickly with some friends or a friend, and that's a filler game. But also, it's something that we're trying to give to people who, if you told them just played a war game and say, no, I didn't, I don't play war games, I play Euro games. It's like, no, this is a war game and it's fun. And guess what? You just played it. So it can introduce people to gaming, historical games, and it can introduce them to history in a way that, obviously Euro games don't do, and other games just can't.
So much to unpack here. And, you preach it. Yeah. So you preach it to the choir. So 2 years ago, I worked on a game called Heart of Leviathan, and it was a Dreadnought naval miniatures game. It took us some of the rules from very popular games, such as Star Wars X-Wing, used where, you could take the HMS Iron Duke, but with cards, you can upgrade it. And the grogs on Facebook ripped it apart because it is not Secret. It is not a rivet counting game. One of the things I've tried explaining to people is there's no, especially for naval games, there's no gateway drug. How do we get new gamers into it? Because if you're going to get a new gamer into wargaming, you're not going to give them Campaign for North Africa, which you just said.
Exactly.
It is 100% right. How do we get folks interested in this? And, okay, well, I still hate the cards. I get that. Well, look at the games that are killing historical wargaming. They all have cards. They all let you upgrade. Yeah, it's not 100% historical, but, these games are not Sims. They're meant to have a good time. They're meant to spark, intellectual thought about what went right, what went wrong. And it's supposed to, I've always looked at wargaming as a, if I'm reading a book on it, I'm looking at a war game to play of the same subject, and back and forth. Phil reads a ton of books about the Japanese in the 30s and 40s. He plays a lot of those games. They go hand in hand. We need kind of that entry into the hobby. And those old grogs, and I guess I could almost consider myself one, they have to have a more open mind to grow the hobby. So when you say a filler game, I always carry one of those in my bag at every convention.
That's great. I'm really
I would add,
happy with that.
I would add that any hobby you're going to get somebody into, if you ask them to give up 7 hours at a time, that's a challenge. And that's true whether it's wargaming or skiing or hiking or anything. If somebody is totally new and you go, hey, block off 7 hours,
yeah,
they're going to look at you like, I'm sorry, what? For what exactly?
Exactly. You're right. Yep.
So a shorter game is definitely appealing. And to piggyback off of what Mitch said, one of the things that I always try to keep in mind is there's a saying by a mathematician, George Box, from the 70s that I quote all the time. which is all models are wrong, some models are useful. With respect to George Box, I think he's right, but I would extend that to say all games in general. In other words, there is no 100% war game, 100% realistic war game, and if there was, people wouldn't play it, because the business of actually conducting war, of making sure that Private Snuffy brought all the ammunition he was supposed to and is well hydrated, that's quite boring. It's not a lot of fun. The fun part is the tactics. So every game is already somewhat removed from reality in order to focus on the meat of it. To me, the sacrifices made for playability aren't inherently bad, so long as you know what you're getting. Like that's the big thing I would say. So it really appeals to me, the idea of seeing a quick card game to play about World War I or the Great War, which is perennially undergamed. So it's nice to see it getting some love.
Well, I agree with you completely, Phil. I think that that's the best thing that we can ever do as game designers, as game developers, no matter what level we're involved, is that no matter what, it's like the frog that hops halfway to the wall and never reaches the wall because it only hops halfway each time. It's like the wall is reality. And all of our simulations will never reach that because, like you said, no one's shooting at us. We're not going to die. When we're done with the game, we're going to go to lunch with the guy that was trying to kill us. I mean, you can't have reality in a game. So why do games? I mean, games are huge right now, not just in the military, but in corporate world, in healthcare, in K through 12, and upper division in education. The bottom line to me is that you're trained to make decisions. You have to figure out what are the important factors involved and what do I have to do to make that work. It's problem solving, it's management, and whether it's managing logistics for a hospital or managing logistics for a battle, it's the same principles. And I think that training people and educating them to do these things is why you have Connections, which I think both you guys are probably familiar with Connections, the conference.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And then there's Serious Play and several other conferences where, I mean, this is serious stuff now. It's not just commercial games, which I love. It's not just, video games that are, first person shooters like Call of Duty. It includes serious games that are used for education and training. And I have a foot in both camps. And so when I say I'm doing something that would help the hobby, there's nothing wrong with that just because it's a simple game, because even the people at Connections help play test this game.
So any guy that brings up Zeno's Paradox with the frogs, I'm a big fan of. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much. But, so Phil and I recently briefed over the last month at Georgetown Wargaming, and I briefed about Title 10 Wargaming. One of the points I made is that, the Ed McGrady's and the Peter Perlas, I've read their books, I've met with them, I've talked to them. I have learned more from civilian game designers than anywhere else. And last Connections that was run in person, I brought a miniatures game for folks to see, because I noticed from talking to Matt Caffrey, it's mostly board games. And I said, I want to show them something that has really good aesthetics. But I kept asking the folks that were playing in my game during game night, think about the mechanics. Think about, does this game do what it's supposed to do? Does it put you in the movie of early colonial warfare? And I do that with the guys at work. I bring in games like Blood Red Skies. I brought in a ton of games to teach how mechanics set the scene that you want folks to wargame in. And I think that that's where innovation is happening more so than anywhere else. Look, I have an ORSA background and I could tell you about statistics, but, I can't get folks to wargame like that. I need them, just like you said, to make decisions. I need the scenario and the environment of the game to put them in real world pressure, which obviously they're not in real combat. And I need them to make decisions on strategic and operational scale and in a 2-week war game. So I'm about to say hallelujah. And I know Phil probably is too.
Oh, very much so. I run smaller versions of games. I do agile games, which tend to have fewer players and the decisions are less dramatic. But I would go so far to say that accessibility is underrated. I think when people look at what is the perfect game, and this is the various grognards and all of us that get very, very into military history, we can lose sight of the fact that for many of these people, just a chance to dip their toes in is how they're going to learn something. And that accessibility angle is a big deal, because will everybody you play this with become a huge detailed wargamer? Probably not. But will they leave knowing more than when they sat down? Absolutely.
Yep.
And that really is something that I would like to see more folks buy into. The idea that maybe instead of all this depth that we've ever looked at, a better idea is more, I guess, width, horizontal reach out. If more people were playing a little bit about these past wars, I think that might be better than if a few people were playing the wars head to toe.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely correct. I think both of you guys are on the same path that I've been on for a while. And I have to say that, they've already learned this in education, that if you make something that is fun, literally fun, that not only do they want to learn more about what it is you're presenting, but retention is greater. And if they've learned that, not just K through 12 and not just, the higher educational levels, but, in corporate world, in healthcare, and I'm sure you guys, you're active in the military sphere and also in the intelligence community. And the fact is that if it's challenging, if it's interesting, then, you can have easier time getting buy-in to it. And I think you guys have probably experienced that.
Oh yeah. Trying to figure out andagogy, and what makes it fun. And one of the things I've brought since I went to Air Force Wargaming is the fun element. And I get laughed at a lot. And from talking to Matt Caffrey a lot, I said, look, if the games are fun, because I need volunteers for my games. Other than my section and Phil's section, we have very few full-time wargamers in the DoD. If it's fun, I'm getting the graduated colonel wing, fighter wing commanders coming back as it's fun, because they want to win the game. They want to learn from it. And, they understand that we're playing a cruel experiment on them. We're watching and we're evaluating them, but, they don't mind to be in the habit trail.
Yep.
So that is something I am just trying to infuse. And it was part of my talk a few weeks ago at Georgetown, which I don't know if we need to get you in touch with Sebastian, because he's another guy that thinks just like the three of us, that you need to go talk to his students, because, we really need to have almost a revolution in games to get these great ideas. Because, when I pull in, 06s and general officers, I hate to say this and no disrespect, I know what they're going to tell me, because they have, just like me, years of doctrine and training to fall back on. So it makes it, for me, very hard to put them in a situation where they lose that confidence, and to think outside the box. So yeah, hey, folks that are out there, we didn't plan on this. It just went that way, because probably people say, well, he loves talking about the Great War, but is this a whole thing about game design? Yeah, of course it is. One question I was going to ask, though, about the Great War game, since this is a switch, for you, and I don't know if you've covered Great War games in the past. What were the biggest challenges, other than the play testing and the combinations of the cards, to get this to a final product?
That's a great question, because one of the things you won't find are tons of trenches. And the first thing you think is, anyone familiar with the Great War is going to go, what? Where are the trenches? Yes, there are trenches. There are trenches that are shown on a few of the cards that indicate what turn it is, and on another card, that playmat that basically shows Russian trenches, early war, and the trenches are there. But here's the thing. Trenches were everywhere. After the first, open warfare in August, everyone started digging in on both fronts in September and after that, and they just got more and more complicated, more complex, more sophisticated, and more in depth. They're already there. That's not the challenge. The challenge is, how can I capture those trenches? How can I hold those trenches? And so that's a factor of, are these reinforced trenches? Is there barbed wire available to channel the attackers or defenders? In other words, what do I have available? And so the assets, the cards that come up randomly are, do I have enough infantry? Do I have enough machine guns? Do I have artillery? And is that artillery available when I need it, where I need it? And do I have other factors like aerial reconnaissance to help direct the artillery fire? So the greatest challenge to me was, how do I design a World War I game without trenches? Okay. And basically that's what I did. And so I tried to say it's there. They're there. They're not gone. It's just that you would end up with a handful of cards because everyone would have to have trench cards every turn. And that's not the interesting part.
Or you can move the game to one of my favorite theaters, East Africa.
Yes,
so
absolutely. Yep.
So when I read through your rules, I said, what a sneaky bastard. And I'll tell you why. you do something that's very slick here. And you just kind of mentioned it, is in order to win in this trench warfare, you have to blend your capabilities near perfectly. Yeah, there's a die roll, guys. Don't worry about it. And understand what capabilities, combined arms, supporting arms, ISR, that you need to crack that stalemate. And you do it. I don't know if you intended to do it, but it's in there, but it doesn't bog down the game. No one's going to quiz the players on how to blend capabilities with synergistic effects. Yet you do that. Was that planned?
Yes, it was, although in some cases not from the very get-go. Okay, let me explain that. For example, I just mentioned aerial reconnaissance. Everyone knows that they replaced horses, cavalry, for finding out things, reconnaissance on the battlefield, and the aerial component grew in more and more importance. So they started using radios. They used photography to try and identify, and there was now photographic interpretation of battlefields so they could determine targets, and all that sort of grew. Well, my aspect of the design that had that element more and more important in the game was also sort of evolutionary. I thought initially it'll just be a game about teaching World War I, you take the cards, blah, blah, blah. But I got sucked into doing what you just said, which is, this could do a lot more without adding enormous a number of rules or more complexity. You can keep it right on the cards, but have those cards interact in so many different ways. But at the same time, historically, there's no like zombies, there's no like airplanes, attacking the individual tanks. That didn't happen. They didn't have that. So it's realistic in terms of the historical realism, but it's not a simulation. And so the one thing that I'm really happy about is that you see that, Mitch. You saw that in what you read in the rules and what I was doing. And yes, I am proudly wearing your title of sneaky bastard.
Yes, I meant that with all due respect, but
no, I take it. I understand.
It is a very Mitchian compliment.
Yes, and so what games I love the most are the ones that are not 700 rules and have realistic things underneath the hood of the game that I don't need to be an expert in the placement of artillery to understand the effects of it on the battlefield. And game designers are starting to do that. Now, I wonder, is this something they picked up from doing research, or is this just how games are going, where we could put depth in there without killing the players?
Well, I think that what really makes me happy is that you can play the game and learn something about World War I and about the development, evolution of warfare and combat. Okay, it's not that I expect everyone to go and then suddenly build a library of books. Okay, that'd be great. That'd be wonderful. But there's so much that is thrown at us every day on the internet, on television, on the radio. We have so much that we have to contend with. And yet at the same time, there's so much that we could never learn in a lifetime, 20 lifetimes. So I'm not asking for people to go and start a library on World War I. If all you can ever do is read what's on the cards and learn from playing the game, I consider that a tremendous accomplishment.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's just looking at, first of all, the artwork, folks out there is, and we'll put the Kickstarter link at the bottom when we post this. The artwork is amazing, but if you look at the cards, and I haven't seen all the cards yet, just what you've posted, both on your webpage and on the Kickstarter, you could it kind of clicks really quickly to see how this game runs. And I am really looking forward to this game. the other interesting thing about the game is these are such cool looking cards that you can also play poker and blackjack with them because they are they are
Yes.
normal cards.
They are.
I just somewhat am really attracted to this. So when you play, there are cards for central powers, cards for allied powers, and you have random events, bonuses, and then something called the white deck. How do they all interact with one another?
Okay, so basically there are there are two decks of cards that come in the basic game. There's a red deck and a blue deck. Red deck are the British Empire forces against the Germans, and the blue deck are the French Empire forces against the Germans. And the white deck include all of the other nations: America, Russia, Serbia, Italy, the Ottoman Empire, and so you can have scenarios and other things with them. So the white deck really are the same sort of cards, but they're just basically all the other nations and factors. What you do to play the game is you draw a random event card first. Okay, they just draw whatever it is, and it's obviously random. So it could be bad weather. Well, if it's bad weather, both sides' airplanes are not able to fly. Period. So all of a sudden you can't control that, but you may have a handful of aviation cards and you can't use them. That's an example. You also have bonus cards, which are things like improved doctrine, improved weapons, because all of that development was going on during the war. So whatever they started with was getting improved as both sides were, in a contest to make improved aircraft, to improve their communications and whatever else it was. So you've got these cards that are, as you said, Central Powers cards. You've got allies cards. You also have neutral cards, which either side can use. And a neutral card would be an example like field telephones or wireless, which is radio, because they both had those things. And so these cards are universal. They're going to be good for either side. And then, of course, the bonus cards are, I've been able to introduce a new weapon. Instead of a heavy machine gun, which really is just literally heavy, you have ones that can be portable by an individual, a Lewis gun that one guy can carry and another few people would carry ammunition. And suddenly you've got a mobile machine gun on the battlefield, and that adds bonus points to your attack, for example. So you have these cards, you get a hand of cards that include your side, Central Powers or allies, some neutral cards, some bonus cards. You have to modify all that by whatever the random event is that's chosen. And then whoever's the defender puts his cards out first, because he determines the terrain. He determines the whatever the first element in the first line of trenches is facing the attacker. And then the attacker puts down his first cards on the attack, which could be some kind of rolling barrage, for example, or it could be just simply random fire. It could be a night assault. There's several different ways he could go on this, and then that allows the defender to react to it, and then the attacker reacts to that. There's a couple of turns, or rather phases within the turn that allow you to play jokers. A joker might be Matahari and spies, which means that you can cancel the other side's jack, which jacks are all the commanders. And yes, I did have a lot of humor in this. Jacks are short. Even though the jack is a type of card in a card game, I use jacks as jackasses, as in, the individual soldiers said, we are lions led by donkeys. Well, they're the donkeys, and that's what they are in the game. So if you have a Matahari card, you could cancel a jack, and what it does is it ruins his effectiveness. Whatever happened, it's not just about spies. It's just that something's going on that has made this guy unable to function at his peak. Distraction, illness, whatever, that card represents that. And so he no longer has that control over the battlefield, whether defense or attack. So you've got these things that can come in randomly. You've got things of cards that a player can play, and it's over very quickly. The turn's over, move on to the next turn. And you add up the points that are on the cards they're very clear. And you keep track of it on like a cribbage counter type of, there's a playmat that has like a cribbage counter type of effect.
Yeah, I'm looking at the cards now. There are some altered pictures. I forgot what you call it when you take an actual picture and enhance it a little bit.
When you colorize a historic.
Colorize. Yeah. Looking at the Matahari card, she's a fascinating character. How much research did you guys do for this? Because for a card game, and you're saying it's a filler game, the research by no means it's very well done.
Thank you. And it took me, I would say that what happened, let me step back and just tell you that right in the middle of trying to do this game, and this was a bonus, this was not a negative, I got an assignment to go and create a Great War and America exhibit down in San Francisco. I live in Oakland, California, so it's very easy for me to just go across the bridge and go into San Francisco. And I met with the people who run the San Francisco Performing Arts Foundation. And they're the ones who have the buildings that were built to honor the World War I veterans. They're called the War Memorial Veterans Buildings. That's where the opera is. That's where the symphony was, and now it's a new building. That's where the ballet, the San Francisco Ballet, performs. And so one of the other buildings, which had the offices, the American Legion and so forth, they wanted to put in an exhibit. And they said, Dana, you are going to be the one we want to do this. You're local, historian, do the work. So I did that. That was in 2018. The exhibit is still up. It's online. People can go look at it. But that forced me to then intensely dive into World War I research, not just for America, but obviously who we were fighting, the Germans. And it just made me go in everything, the French, the British, the Russians. And for about a year and a half, I just immersed myself in that history and figuring out what were the key elements, what were the things that the commanders had to contend with the soldiers had to contend with, what are the things that were random that no one could deal with except to have to somehow figure out to get around. And so for a year and a half, from 2017 to the end of 2018, I worked intensely in research. And so I'm glad that you saw that, because that was not only just finding a bunch of pictures, it was also trying to figure out how are these cards going to interact? How are they going to work with each other or against each other? And so that was probably the most intense thing I've ever done since Streets of Stalingrad.
Wow. I was going to ask, because I love reading about the Great War. What book changed your perceptions of the war and gave you a moment out of all the books you read and research?
That is great. There are a lot of things that are written in World War I history. The British, of course, we read English, so we get that a lot. But I think that there's a couple of people who really made a difference to me. Dennis Showalter, is passed, but Dennis Showalter, who taught a military history, I think it was Colorado University. Mm-hmm. He wrote a book. In fact, there are two books that he was involved in. Let me go grab them real quick, and I'm going to come right back. Hang on.
I don't know about you, Mitch. This means my reading list probably just got a little bit deeper.
Yeah. We may be talking for a long time.
I'm back.
Which is fine. Yeah, Dennis Showalter died in December.
Yeah.
I've never read a bad book by him.
Oh, he wrote the book on Tannenberg, and he said it was his evaluation that of all the battles during World War I, that's the only one that truly meets the same standards of great battles of history.
Right. And I don't even want to get into the book because I could go down a rabbit hole. It's Tannenberg, Clash of Empires. But if you want to know how the Prussian military system and thought dealt with a fluid battle by using Dennis, he's great at bringing the tactical edge alive in the reading. But I'll tell you what, he's a closet logistician. Oh my God.
Krefeld is also one of the best military authors, and Krefeld has written a book about logistics in warfare, and all the way back to ancient times through, I believe, the Arab-Israeli wars, and how logistics has played a role, a critical role in every one of those. North Africa, Europe, the Russian front. So anyway, here are the books. Dennis Showalter wrote Instrument of War. Instrument of War, the German Army, 1914-1918. A brilliant book that tells people how does an army function? How do they develop doctrine? What is doctrine and how does it work? And then the other book, sadly, this came out posthumously, but he did this as his last book with Joe and Janet Robinson, both Army veterans. The German Failure in Belgium, August 1914. If anyone ever wanted to know, well, why didn't it work? Why didn't the Schlieffen Plan work? This book, it's just amazing. It's a case study in how not to conduct a campaign, okay? It's just brilliant. These have changed my entire perspective on World War I because the one about the German army, because they were the key, whether they're going to win or not, and why they failed, and in terms of how they were organized and how they did things. So the book, The Instrument of War, says that. And the other thing is that this book that is a case study of the German failure to basically get their way through Belgium quickly in 1914 to sweep through France, those books have just changed my entire perspective on World War I, because everything else is really not done in the same detail. And I'm talking about serious detail. Usually when you read, at least I have found, I've read a book on a campaign or a battle, and they'll say, okay, they went there, they did this, and then they won, and then blah, blah, blah. It's like, how did that unit, and what unit was it that made the breakthrough? What was the thing that tipped the balance that made that unit able to break through and achieve what they did? And why did the other side not do it? Or why did they fail trying to close that gap? That kind of specific stuff is in this Belgian book. I mean, honestly, it's incredible because they were able to get into war diaries, into even though the primary records of Germany have been destroyed in the bombing of World War II, there's a lot that still survived because individual divisions and units that were not part of the Prussian or Berlin area or East Prussia, those states still exist. They still survived. Baden, for example, their division has all of its records sitting in their archives. You just have to know where it is. So this is an incredible book that tells us in detail what worked and what didn't work for the Germans, and basically they're the ones who they have, despite the fact they're on the defensive on the Western Front so much, they had the initiative on what they were going to do and what they decided to do that ended up losing them the war. And to me, these two books, if you don't even read any other book, I would recommend both of those books to help understand how
I've read Instrument of War, and it's I love books like Shattered Sword that takes doctrine and history, and it shows you the interrelationship between the two. As we were talking, I have not read the Belgian book, but I just purchased it on Kindle. So I will get that done. Just to pump one more Showalter book, his book about panzers in World War II. Let me get Hitler's Panzers. It is about the Blitzkrieg.
Yes.
An amazing book. And then you read the failures of the myth of Blitzkrieg. They're both really good books. Phil, have you ever read any of his stuff?
Yeah, I've read a couple of those titles. He was one of the authors I was assigned talking about the myth of the Blitzkrieg, and he definitely does his due diligence in terms of depth. I'm unfortunately in ignorance of both of the Great War titles mentioned, though they have been added to my nonfiction stack just now. That's what I was up to on Amazon.
Oh, really? Yeah. I just ordered mine as he was talking because that Belgian book sounds great. You know, what was Von Moltke's last words as he was dying? Reinforce that right wing. It's kind of interesting how that would have turned out. And that to me is the thing. There's a few things about the Great War that I've tried to overcome. One is it's not all trenches, folks. If you read about the battles in the Near East and East Africa, I think it was important. I was lucky enough to get pulled into a project last year for a Great War miniatures game. And I said, look, this game, you know, if there's one thing I want to give you developers is let me put in East Africa, let me put in the Middle East. And people are loving it. Now we're working on the second book with the Eastern Front. Hey, we're even throwing the Japanese in. So you could do Qingdao. to me, it really was a world war. It's not all trenches.
Right.
The other one that people seem to skip, the side stories of the Great War, are amazing. You have technology changing in 4 years. The reason why this war was bloody is not because you had bad generals, it's because they didn't understand technology and then how they use technology and innovation. I see here that on your Kickstarter, you mentioned guys like Monash and Curie. They were able to crack the code.
That's right.
You have so many side stories.
Yes.
You got Lenin in the sealed train car. You have Mata Hari. You have it was such an interesting period of history. It also really was a watershed period because you went from the Edwardian era to the shock of the Great War. And if you look at our modern map, it is influenced by that conflict more than any other, I would say.
Oh, yeah, I agree. And we're still living with it. I mean, the entire war on terror is coming out of a region that was artificially cut up by people that didn't live there, that it was imposed on them, and they were still dealing with that. So, I mean, the war, if in that sense, World War I has not ended, And I think one of the things I wanted to point out before we go and end this is that this is a team effort. I've mentioned Roger McGowan, but I don't want anyone to get the impression it was just Roger and me, because you can't have a game that, is successful, and I hope that it's going to be, that it's only one or two guys that did it. There were two graphic artists that helped make those cards just brilliant. Mark Schumann, although he couldn't stay with the project, he started it by making the design that you were admiring so much, Mitch. And then Dan Zillion, who came in and did the colorization of so many of the historical pictures. All of that linked with Roger's artwork. And Rogers was the one who oversaw everything. Like I said, he's a graphic designer, and he made sure that everything fit his vision of what he wanted to present. And those three guys, Roger, Mark, and Dan, brilliant people, brilliant artists, and they make the game fun. No matter what I did, no matter how much you think that I have done, well, that's a great job, Dana. It doesn't matter if people won't pick it up. If they don't think it's interesting or it's like not attractive, it's got to look good.
Very true.
They have made it look good.
Yeah. I picked this one up right away. It is, how short are we? We're about $3,000 sitting here at Sunday at 3:00 Eastern time. It's close. You have 15 days. Folks, if you don't have this and you have an interest in the Great War, or as Dana said, a filler game, pick this up. One thing that folks always ask me every time we preview a game, how does it play solo? This plays solo, folks.
Yes. It is absolutely true. I also want to give a shout out to Mark Kazmarek, who's been a contributor to C3I Magazine for years and has also had 50 years of doing design and development in wargaming. And so he worked on the development of this game. And like I said, it's a cast of 25. I don't want to go into everybody, but you can look at it because I give full credit to everybody in the rules. And I think that that's an important thing to understand, is that there's a cast, just like that giant credit list that runs at the end of every movie now, it goes on forever. Well, a game, if this is going to be successful and people enjoy it, it isn't just Dana Lombardy. It's not just Roger McGowan. It's other people who contribute and make this possible. And I am really proud to be part of that team that we put together to create this game, The Great War.
Yeah, and it's the price is pretty good, folks. It's the early bird's finished for 34, but you also have a teacher's copy, which on the No Dice staff, we have a ton of teachers, and they're always looking for ways to put education, or war games into education in the classroom. Matter of fact, we just, during the roundtable we just hosted, we had two speakers that spoke about that in detail. But this game, if you go to Kickstarter, pick it up. The best thing to do, we're going to throw a link down below, folks, but you can always search for it as McGowan and Lombardy. If you just put in Dana Lombardy, The Great War, fast playing card game, it's going to pop up. And hopefully, if you haven't picked it up, pick it up. but this to me is a game like, if you look at the pedigree of the folks, all 25 of the folks that are in it, you could see that it shines through within this game. I think the detail's rich, but if you just want a light, fun game, this is kind of also for you. Now, I haven't played it yet, but looking at the rules and from what we talked about before, there's a lot in here, folks, and I'm looking forward to pick this up. Well, I picked it up. I'm looking forward to getting this. So after this, what's next? We love spoilers.
Well, okay. I don't mind giving a couple of hints. Back in the day when I did Conflict Magazine, one of the games that I did that was a mini game, not a large game, not like a Streets of Stalingrad, but a small game that went in the magazine, was called Caulk and Goal. I was really fortunate to have as one of my instructors in military history at San Diego State, Alvin Cooks, who was a World War II veteran, intelligence officer, fluent in Japanese, who did research and wrote 2 books on the Nomonhan or Caulk and Goal operation between the Japanese and the Russians, the Soviets, in the Mongolian Manchurian deserts. It was the first time that they had a major clash there with armor. And he wrote 2 books, and he asked me to do the maps on it, and that led to me doing the game. And I'm doing a second edition of that game, which is going to go into play testing here in the first quarter of next year.
Well, if you need a playtester that loves war games and the history of Japan, Phil?
I'm your guy. I'm already interested. Caulk and Goal is one of my favorite underexplored battles. It's a showpiece for some underrated pieces of 1930s military technology, including the BT-5 and BT-7 tanks. Yep. On the Soviet side. And it's also the first big wake-up call that Japan has of, the structure we built for our army may not be working. And unfortunately, They choose to learn basically nothing from that.
Yes, exactly. No, to me, it's fascinating. And I didn't know anything about it until Dr. Cooks, worked me into his project of publishing his books. This is pre-computer days. So I did the maps all by hand way back then, Yeah,
I think I've read one of those 2 books. Many years ago, a game I played, Flames of War, went with early war Japanese, and it was focused around the fighting between the Soviets and the Japanese. And I've done a lot of reading about it. And as far as like how Japan kind of learned how to prosecute the war, that I wouldn't say they learned all the lessons, but I know it's covered a lot in Road of Bones, which is Phil, did you finish that book yet?
Apologies, didn't mute myself. Do you mean Tower of Skulls?
Road of Bones is the one I'm reading about, Kohima and Info. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I did finish Tower of Skulls, and I'm currently working on Shanghai, Stalingrad on the Yangtze. So this is exactly the Second Sino-Japanese War and the subsequent Russian intervention is something I'm very interested in. So yes, absolutely. If you still got billets on the playtest list, let me know.
Just send. You know what? Mitch has my email address. Mitch, give him my email address. I'm basically collecting names right now for playtesters. Happy to put you on.
It's on the Zoom email, and you can throw me on the list too, because Phil and I live near each other and we'll play. But
okay.
Awesome.
Which brings me to the next question. I think it's neat that you're doing that. Do you feel that is a part of military history that is under-gamed and should be gamed more?
I think there's a lot of things that have been overlooked because I don't know how to describe this, but I know that in business, in academia, and in just about everything, and I'm sure the military, you guys have personal experience with that, you end up doing the same things over and over again and studying the same things over and over again because people said this is important. These are the big battles. These are the big campaigns. This is the big business stuff. This is the big, academic things. And so people funnel themselves into that and tend to tell their, the people they're mentoring and the people they're bringing up to do the same. And so a lot of things get overlooked or maybe just ignored that both of you obviously know Caulk and Goal, Nomonhan as not just critical for World War II, but it has so many different lessons to learn about, oops, our doctrine's wrong. Let's pretend it's not wrong and just fight another war. I mean, that's one of the greatest disasters and it ended up being so for Japan. It's a huge lesson. In some respects, that tiny battle in terms of the actual numbers there, I think the Japanese had a reinforced division, and the Soviets had maybe 3 or 4 divisions and some brigades. It didn't matter, though. Everyone ignored it. It's like you've got to have something like Kursk or Stalingrad or D-Day in Normandy. And they say, well, that's it. It's like, no, there's incredible things that can be learned in small battles, small wars that are just as important. And I agree with you that, having great battles of history, I love that series, but I wish it was like, the great battles you never heard of.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was a little known Soviet general that took.
Yeah. Unknown general.
He was relatively unknown. And when Stalin needed help, when the gates of Moscow were getting bombarded, Georgy Zhukov came. It's fascinating history. And that is something that gaming does. It brings history to life. Phil, since you've been on this kick of reading about Japan, how many Japanese themed games have you been playing?
A handful. I played Lion of Malaya, which was from Tiny Battle Publishing. I like that quite a bit. I still, every once in a while, set up Empire of the Sun, although I have yet to find an opponent. Again, this is a game, one of Mark Herman's best, I think, but the 7-hour time commitment is daunting. And even with the smaller South Pacific module, I could still only get a handful of people to play it with me. There's another couple of games out about Japan later on in the war in their last failed offensives across the China-Burma-India theater, but I haven't managed to get my hands on them yet.
So we have Culk and Go and Monahan coming up next. Any spoilers? We're going to have to. I think we're going to have you come back to talk about those. Okay. I would love to do a whole thing and talk to you about game design, because I think folks do have an interest in it. One of the things you see a lot in social media is, they're very quick to point out if a game sucks. I'm like, well, get with a developer and work on a better game. Mm-hmm. They don't realize how hard it is.
Yes. I mean, if that's any lesson that I have learned, it's that, every time I think, this is not going to be that hard. It's like, those are the worst words to ever say about any project that is involved in research, serious research. Doesn't matter whether it's history or not. And then trying to put together something that is sophisticated enough that other people can understand it, in the case of a game, but also teaches whatever it is that you're trying to, basically impart on people. And it's partly art, it's partly science. And I think that, we could devote several programs to that, but I really appreciate, Mitch, you and what you gave me today in terms of opportunity to let people know what I was working on. Thank you so much. And I would love to come back and talk on whatever subjects you want to talk about.
Awesome. Well, Phil, any last words?
Thanks for coming. I feel like I've learned a lot just in the past hour of talking. I've definitely, my to-read stack has gotten bigger, but I don't consider that a problem.
Exactly. All right. Thank you
so much. Thank you very much. And we're going to sign off now. You can check the game out on Kickstarter. And folks, trust me, if you like what we were talking about, pick this game up, and we'll be coming at you later.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining the show tonight. Remember to follow us on Twitter at No Dice, No Glory. And keep the conversation going on NoDiceNoGlory.com, now featuring our own message boards. Have a great night, everybody.